Welcome everybody to this edition of Tackle Box Talks. I'm Daniel Kittleson with Washington County Parks, and today we have Mark Davis, the co-host of the show, as well as Peter from Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. Today we're going to be discussing many questions regarding our fish species here at Hague Lake, along with other topics associated with fish biology. Have a great time.
What a beautiful spring day out here at Henry Hague Lake. Love this place. And you know, you can see the water skiers are just overwhelming us with their presence, but this is a pretty nice day. We lucked out for being able to do this and, you know, get a good view of the lake and just see what's going on. A little rain coming over the hill, but we're here under this beautiful pavilion over at Ramp C and staying a little bit dry. I'd like to introduce Peter. He's a fish biologist with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and we're going to be finding out a lot of information from him today. Peter?
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Mark.
Good to be here, and you too. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
Well, we have, let's see, I have a fair stack of approved questions here that we can go over. One of the first ones that I know people are going to be interested in is what caused you to go into fish biology, and where did you get your initial degree?
I think that like most fish biologists, I grew up fishing. I grew up out in the woods and the waters quite a lot, and so I had just kind of a personal interest in it. And that led to professional interest. I liked being outdoors. I liked the idea of being able to work with fish. And I like the idea of being able to work on conservation, preservation, and restoration of natural habitat. So one thing sort of led to another. I actually got my undergraduate degree in just straight up biology and was much more terrestrial based. But after that, I took a few years between college and graduate school and got the opportunity to work on some stream restoration projects. And that really piqued my interest in fish and fisheries. And so when I decided to go into graduate school, I went into a fisheries program, and the rest, as they say, is history.
All right. It's, many of my friends are either marine biologists or fish biologists, and they started out many different ways, but, you know, usually they were going to one of the two Oregon schools, and they found out there were some halfway decent rivers close by. Is this kind of a familiar story for you?
I think so. I guess I'm an itinerant fish biologist in the sense that I've traveled and worked all over the country. I've moved between the public and the private sector, and everywhere from New England, upper Midwest, and now the last 7 years, my family and I have found ourselves out here in Oregon, and we love it. It's been an amazing experience to discover all the great waters and all the great opportunities the state has to offer. There are some really unique resources here that make it a wonderful place to be.
This is kind of a loaded question, but what part of the state do you like best? And in that part of the state, what fish do you like to pursue?
Oh boy. It is a loaded question. I think that I like whatever water I can get to most conveniently. With a job, with a family, my time is pretty limited. So I really enjoy fishing, I guess, the west side of the Cascades, the Sandy and the Clackamas, because they're close to home. I can be there very quickly. But when I get a chance, I do love to jump over the mountain onto the east side. And again, because of proximity, the Deschutes is one that I can get to regularly, and I really enjoy. I think that side of the mountain feels much more like a born and bred Midwesterner thinks of the West, looking like you've got the bitter brush and sage out there. So it feels very, very Western to me. But I've been all the way out kind of in the Enterprise region. The Winnehaha and the Wallowa are both rivers that I've had a lot of fun on too. So really pick a water, bring your rod to it, and try your luck.
What I like about the east side is when you get up in the morning and the sun's just thinking about coming over a hill and you get the smell of that sage. There's just something magical about that. One of the questions in here was, what type of fish do you like best? And we were talking about Henry Hague Lake and something I've never caught here, and I've been fishing it since they started filling this lake, but I have never caught a crappie. out here at Henry Haig, and sounds like you were doing pretty well out here in the middle on your last visit.
Yeah, I think it would have been October. We were out here jigging for crappie, just vertical jigging below the boat, and caught quite a few. There, again, being a Midwestern boy by birth, I grew up on crappie and panfish, walleye, things of that nature. So they carry a soft spot in my heart for sure, and they make excellent table fare if you can find them.
Yes. Yeah. Crappie, walleye, and what was the other one we were talking? Oh, the yellow perch.
Yellow perch.
Yellow perch.
One of my favorite breakfasts, as I was saying, just fry up some yellow perch fillets, cut them in there with some soft boiled eggs. The breading soaks up the yolk, and you can fish all day on it.
Oh, yeah. Well, one of the things we do out here with Free Fishing Weekend is, in fact, in this very pavilion, we bring about 600 kids over the weekend, and parents and whoever else wants to go out in the boat, and we try to get as many as we can out in the boat as well, which makes it kind of exciting. What do you think for kids? Just don't worry about the adults. For kids, what do they need to know about fishing?
I think that the thing, to my mind, that kids need to know about fishing is how fun and accessible it is. Like I said, get a rod, you get some basic equipment, head out to a local water, be it a stock trout pond, the Willamette River, and you stand a good chance of catching fish. And it's fun, it's outside, it's challenging. It's something that's very simple to start, but just like your video games, every level you want to move up, you can make it harder and harder on yourself, depending on what techniques you want to try. And it's a lifetime of learning and new experiences. Some of the best friends I've made, some of the most fun I've ever had, some of the best memories I have are fishing with friends, with relatives. It's just a wonderful, fun activity.
You mentioned the Deschutes. I'm guessing there's probably a fly rod involved with that over there.
There has been from time to time. I am definitely gear and species agnostic. I believe if you're willing to change the type of fish you're fishing for and willing to change the technique you're going to use, you can have great fishing in Oregon any day of the year.
With Henry Haig Lake and Scoggin Valley Park, I think I call it the jewel of the Coast Range, and I think that's what it is. It's so close to the metro area, and then for the smaller metro areas, it's surrounded. But as you can see, it's just a beautiful setting, and it's so close by, and it's convenient. But one of the things about Haig Lake, for the trout anyway, it's a put and take lake. Most of those trout get put in, and they're designed for one thing, and that is to go home with somebody for dinner. So why is it that Haig Lake is so conducive to not only trout remaining year-round, but also the spiny ray fishing? And I understand there's even some sturgeon that are in here.
Yeah, we've gotten reports of sturgeon, and I've seen the pictures, and I believe it. That was actually my role previous to this. For the last 5 years, I was actually the sturgeon research project leader for Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and those pictures did come across my desk every now and again. You know, I think that what makes Haig Lake such a good lake for the fish from a biological perspective is the productivity. You've got a lot of nutrient inputs coming into the lake from the surrounding watershed, which create a nice base for your food web, and then it builds up from there. So when your fish, they're going to eat plankton and kind of the small, almost microscopic bugs, when they have plenty of what we call forage, things to eat, that allows them to grow, and then it's just a fish eat fish world from there. Some of the smaller fish provide forage for the larger fish. And I think the other thing that I really think is great about Haig Lake is the fact we do have, as you've kind of alluded to, a two-tier fishery here. We have more warm water species, your bass, your crappie, things of that nature, but then we've also got stock trout. And so those complement each other in terms of biting at different times of year.
Yep.
And they also feed on each other a little bit.
A little bit. Some of those big trout have had lots of little crappie and perch in them, yes. So that's what makes them big. And Daniel was telling me that they got a great big one out of here just last week.
Oh.
It was showing up on Facebook, Daniel, right? Yep.
Yeah.
Any idea how big it was? Huh? It's like,
No.
it sounded like it was big, about 5-6 pounds. My guess is probably a brooder.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we do get brood stocked in here. That's one thing I do try to do is whenever I get an email come across my desk from the hatcheries that they're looking to do something with brood stock, I always try to jump on that if I can and see if I can't get a few put over here into Hag.
Perfect. One of the questions, well, first of all, something that I do in the winter a lot is I fish for kokanee. And people have asked me, do they have kokanee out here in Henry Hag Lake? And I say, I've never caught one. Why can't they have kokanee here?
I don't think it's an issue of can't. Obviously you could stock them and they would probably have some level of success out here. But I guess the way I usually describe it is sometimes as a fish biologist, the hardest thing to do is nothing. It's to leave a good thing alone.
Mm-hmm.
And again, speaking of that two-tier fishery, we have a strong two-tier fishery here with trout and the warm water species. And anytime you introduce a new species into a lake, you're going to change the dynamics of that lake, often in ways that you can't fully understand and appreciate. And I think that as fish biologists, we've kind of learned the lessons of the past when it was kind of the bucket brigade, just throwing whatever fish into whatever pond, lake, river, and seeing what happened. And we're a lot more, I think, careful about where we put what. And again, there's such a good resource here. I think that the hardest thing to do is just say, let's allow that resource to continue and not risk perturbing it.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that happened this last year, of course, with the COVID thing, that so many people, they had to stay at home or they had to stay isolated from other folks, and they found this to be an ideal place to come out with the boat and take the kids out. You know, they're not in school, so and I'm sure people were going crazy with the home confinement.
I know I was.
But the response to the number of people coming out here, both on the shore and from the boats, was tremendous. So they were beating on it real hard throughout the winter. We'll get stockings this year, and again, it's a put and take lake. We're going to get some stockings coming up here about when?
They've actually already started for the year. We're sitting here. I don't know if you guys put a date on this, but we're sitting here right around the end of February, and a few stockings have already happened, and they'll be continuing March, April throughout the year. So our regular stocking schedule has already started.
Okay, very good. And as you alluded to a little earlier with the brood stock, I really like it. One of the questions in here is, what kind of fish do you like the best? I like the ones that are on the other end of the line. Anything from little tiny golden trout that are 7-8 inches long to 180-pound tarpon is my favorite kind of fish, as long as it's on the other end of the line. Desert Springs Hatchery has been providing really high quality commercial grade fish to Hag Lake. I understand there were some problems with the purchase of the hatchery and some financial situations there. Are we going to get any more of those Desert Springs fish over here?
As it stands right now, Desert Springs is going to be stocking some fish into Hag Lake this year. Now things happen. As we've all certainly learned over the last year, between wildfires, ice storms, and that. But as of now, yes, we're expecting to see some Desert Springs fish go into this lake as part of that regular planting. And I think, as the district fish biologist for this particular area, and in working with our hatcheries, who do a tremendous job of developing a very high quality product and keeping in that product, one of the things I'm working with them on and they're working with me on is trying to produce sort of a regular, consistent fishing experience for people in these lakes. So we're looking at opportunities to do more regular plantings. We're also looking at doing plantings at different times in terms of when we actually bring the fish into the lake, maybe waiting till a little later in the week or just before school holidays. So as you say, we have the opportunity for families and for kids to get out here when they're out of school, when they're available, and just have a real quality fishing experience any time of the year, not just right after the trucks have been here.
One of my favorite fish to catch out of Hag Lake is only about like that, but that's between the eyes. Those brood trout are like that. And, they only put a few of them in compared to the number of regular stockers, but it's fun to catch those things. When you are using a lightweight trout rod and one of those hits it, you're not really sure who has a hold of who, but they are fun and they eat great. And those Desert Springs fish, the quality on them, they're nice pink meated fish, they're fat. I know the folks really appreciate getting those in here, but I also know they're a very expensive fish to provide.
Yes.
So any of those you can head this direction, that would be really, really good.
And those broodstock tend to be more of an opportunistic thing. They're not generally something that's programmed into the schedule. They become available as hatcheries have need to take broodstock out of the hatchery. Like I say, I try to jump on them whenever we get the opportunity. It's a bit of a race. The other district biologists want them to, but I always try to get a few for ag weight.
Me.
Yeah, a little bit of a cage match to see who gets them.
That's good. That's good. One of this one's pretty well written here. Let's describe it as written. Are the rainbow trout stocked in Oregon's lakes specifically selected for faster growth? And what determines how fast the juvenile trout grow in the hatcheries? Because we get some carryovers here.
Mm-hmm. Trout in hatcheries, I think some people would argue they're selected for faster growth. I think overall hatchery trout are selected to do well in hatcheries. These are strains that have generally been in hatcheries and propagated across generations. And some of that involves faster growth. I think the real reason you see faster growth in the hatcheries with a lot of these fish is because they're in a very safe environment. They're not having to hide from predators. They're not having to search very far for food. Food is coming on a regular basis. Water temperature also has a big influence on that within the hatchery. They're able to keep temperatures a lot more stable, closer to the fish's optimum temperature for growth. So I think it has more to do, frankly, with the hard work of the hatchery staff in terms of feeding those fish and growing them up quickly. That being said, there is some selection for fish that are going to do better in a hatchery environment. And so we do see some of that.
This last year with the wildfires, didn't we lose a couple of hatcheries or have them damaged?
Yes, we had a number of our hatcheries were anywhere between lightly and heavily damaged, and we did lose, in our southern group, we did lose an entire hatchery, more or less. As of now, the department intends to rebuild all of those hatcheries and repair the ones that were damaged. That is a process, and it will take time, unfortunately. And we will probably see some impact to the amount of overall fish that we're able to produce this year and into next year. Again, tremendous credit to the hatchery staff. They saved as many fish as they could, and they ramped up production on a lot of them. Oh. But unfortunately, because they are fish and not, say, a car part, we can't just add an additional shift, put an additional line into production. There is a certain minimum time it takes to grow these fish out. So it's hard to ramp production up and down. So we will, unfortunately, see some impacts to our overall stocking numbers.
One of the things that I do is I fish in other states a lot, and I've been fishing more and more in Washington. Reason being is that, again, the kokanee, they are so good to eat. They are so good to eat. They're a little bit better than those Desert Springs fish, but not a whole lot. But, they're so good to eat. Coming up in March, I've got a trip going over to Roosevelt, which is behind Grand Coulee Dam, for very large kokanee and for very large rainbow. And over there, they raise the triploid rainbow. Can you describe what they are?
Okay. A triploid rainbow trout is, to all intents and purposes, very similar to your regular rainbow trout. Trout, like humans, are diploid. They have two sets of chromosomes. When you have a triploid trout, it's kind of exactly what it sounds like, tri. We introduce a third chromosome in there. And what that does is it makes the fish sterile. So it's much safer for us to stock those fish into waters, because if they do escape, if they do get out into the wild, they actually can't interbreed with any wild rainbow cutthroat type trout populations that we already have in those. And there may also be some benefits, as you talked about growth earlier. When a fish is not putting energy towards developing eggs and milt, it theoretically has that energy to put towards growing bigger, towards its body size. And so there is some indication that triploid trout might get a little bigger and grow a little bit faster, because instead of having to think about putting energy towards reproduction, they can put all that energy towards growth.
So all of the energy goes towards the growth rather than
point.
having to develop the gonads. Well, let's see. Oh, this is a good question put to me by someone. I used to fish down on the Alsea a whole lot, and the hatchery down there has given over a lot of its production to the raising of rainbow instead of steelhead. What's the reason for that? Why would they pick different areas and have trout in one hatchery and steelhead in another, and then perhaps find a need to combine them?
It's really based on what our production needs and goals are, how they choose to manage the hatchery. And it's not, between, say, trout and steelhead, it's really not a zero-sum game. In a lot of cases, steelhead and trout complement each other within a hatchery system, because you can kind of think about the hatchery as an artificial version of the rivers and streams. So at the time steelhead are coming into a natural river and stream, that's when they're coming into a hatchery. At the time, and those would be the adults, the time the smolts or the juveniles are leaving, they're leaving the hatchery at the same time they would be leaving their natural streams. So in a lot of cases, for instance, this time of year, as trout are beginning to leave the hatchery, now we got winter steelhead coming in. So in a lot of cases, hatcheries can time their schedules so those two species can be raised in complement with each other. And when we make decisions about hatchery capacity, those are made within the system based on production needs. And really, steelhead and trout decisions are made independently of each other, in the sense that we look at what our steelhead needs are and we figure out where we have the capacity to meet those needs. And we look at the trout needs and we look at where we have the capacity to meet those. So I think sometimes there's this impression that it's a zero-sum game and any gain by steelhead is kind of a loss by trout. But really they are two complementary species. The decisions on them are made independently, and so we're not really robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak, in that situation. We can really balance both for the most part.
How long has Oregon actually had trout hatcheries?
Trout hatcheries, certainly close to or over 100 years. The earliest record of a hatchery I was able to find was 1877. That was a salmon hatchery in that case, and we've had them. But trout hatcheries really followed pretty closely on the footsteps of those first salmon hatcheries. And a lot of hatcheries have gone through different iterations. So they may have raised trout at one time, as you just kind of alluded to in your previous question, and then they may raise salmon at a different time. So it's a little hard to say when exactly, but certainly 100 years or so.
If a trout were placed in this lake, as a lowland lake, how long, if it were not caught, would that trout be expected to survive?
In the wild trout can be 10 or 11 years old. Mm-hmm. So I would expect that hatchery trout would not be necessarily far behind that. Mm-hmm. 10 or 11 years old is about what I would guess. I don't have exact numbers for this lake.
If memory serves, the state record smallmouth bass came out of Henry Hague Lake, and
yes.
That record still holds here?
Yes, 8 pounds, just shy of 8 pounds, 2 ounces.
Mm-hmm. The fish were not stocked officially. I'm sure it was a bucket biologist that originated the process, but for spiny rays, what all types of fish are in the Hague Lake?
You got smallmouth, the ones you tend to hear about, smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, crappie are the big ones. And those are the ones people tend to target the mm-hmm. most in this lake. And
I've caught some really nice catfish out of here.
Okay.
Too.
I'm glad you said that, actually. I apologize. There are the catfish that go into here.
And I've seen one sturgeon hooked.
Yes.
That didn't end well. It was right at their feet. They were taking a video, and then it just left. Mm-hmm. But it looked to be about 5 feet long. Those catfish, are they bullheads? That's what they look like.
Yeah, they're going to most likely be bullhead catfish.
And they eat very well,
yes.
by the way. Yeah, those don't go back. Those go home.
No, sir.
Let's see. Oh, yes, I remember Oregon bass and panfish being involved in, let's see, can you talk a little on the spider blocks and why they're used in Hague Lake?
Yeah, Absolutely. So the spider blocks, for people who may not have been out to Hag Lake, they're essentially meant to simulate structure. Because this lake is a reservoir, when it was initially flooded, when they put the dams in, they went through and cleared out all the trees, all the brush that was in the dam area. So that left very little in the way of structure on the bottom of the lake for fish to hide in, live in, complete their life processes in. Spider blocks are meant to simulate that, and they are cinder blocks with lengths of pipe cemented into them that are placed in the lake, and they're meant to simulate down trees, down logs, grass, natural habitat that fish would see. And if you come out here sometimes in the fall when the water level's much lower, you'll actually be able to see them from the shore. They kind of have this alien, otherworldly spider look to them. When you first see one, you can really understand why they're called spider blocks. And those have largely been a project of Gary Galovich, one of our warm water biologists for the state. Actually the only one we have at present. And then also folks like the Oregon Bass and Panfish Club, 503 Bassers, and a number of other volunteer angler groups who will actually come out. They'll build them one weekend at a ramp, and then they'll come back a few weekends later and help deploy them within the lake. And they're actually set out within the lake to provide structure for fish to key in around, and can actually provide some good fish locations for some pretty good fishing.
Do they actually get some plant life or algae growth on them?
Sure, they certainly can, and they can provide kind of an anchor habitat for plant life to begin to emerge around them. But their real purpose is to provide a habitat analog to key in on. It's hard to, with a dam here, it's hard to put actual logs, actual trees in the lake that have the potential to move and get sucked into the dam and cause real problems.
I can see there's a few of them as the water's coming up. There's a few of them out there now.
Yep.
Either that or alligators, I'm not sure which.
Oh, Lord help us, I hope there's no alligators.
They'd be a little slow this time of year. What would a typical day look like for a trout? I know they're better caught in the morning sometimes, but when the water's cold, the fishing can get better in midday. What stirs up a trout's juices to get to eating?
I think the same thing that really gets any of us going, which is hunger. I think you tend to see, and it's also a time of year type of thing. In the late fall, early spring, or in the winter where conditions are colder, as the water warms up, because fish are cold-blooded species, their body is the temperature of the surrounding environment or the water around them. As the water warms up during the course of the day, their body temperature warms up. So in the winter, they might be more active at midday on our rare sunny days out here when the sun has had time to hit and warm up the water. Conversely, in more of the summer period or late spring, early fall, you're going to see them probably be more active in cruising the shallows in the early part of the day because the water is cooler. And they're going to be, at that point, in the shallows when it's cooler, when it's a little less sunny, cruising looking for food. And they're going to be feeding on, small, I'm trying not to use the small bugs that are going to be emerging from the shallows there. They're going to be coming out at them in the mornings and in the evenings.
Well, there's some fly fishermen that, they're all right, they're okay. But what are some of the aquatic zooplankton that we have in the lake?
You're going to probably, to be honest, I don't have the exact species on that one, but you're going to probably see your normal chironomids, some of your midges, things of that nature. They're going to be bottom feeders and shredders and the like.
Quite often when I'm cleaning the fish, I'll see it's almost like a green goo, but if you put a little water on it, you can see that they're individual animals that maybe look like a small shrimp. Is that something that's out here?
Yeah, and that would be, you mentioned zooplankton. Those are small animals. Those are probably phytoplankton. They're going to be kind of like plants. They take their energy from the sun and photosynthesize just like plants do. And there's certainly algae and other sort of microscopic plant life that these fish, particularly the smaller fish, are going to be feeding on. Just like anything else, if they can't fit it in their mouths, they can't feed on it. So fish kind of change their diets as they grow up. When they're smaller, they're going to be feeding on those small plant life phytoplankton. As they get larger, they'll feed on zooplankton. And then if they're fortunate to get big enough, they'll switch over to feeding on other fish and even things like frogs, snakes, other animals that are getting into the streams and lakes.
A popular bait out here for people fishing from shore is power bait,
Yep.
which is a floating bait. What is there about power bait that is so attractive to trout?
I think it's the color and the smell. To be honest, I think they're keying in on the chemical signal. I can honestly say I've never seen anything in nature that looks like power bait, but for some reason they eat them and they love it. So
They eat them real good.
Yeah.
And trolling out here is a lot of fun. Out here for trolling, when you're moving in a moving boat and have the lure behind you, you want to have something that's going to be looking like a fish, more than likely. And I know that there's got to be a few worms, night crawlers, and things that wash into the lake this time of year when the water's up. So, and I'm pretty sure those fish didn't see a night crawler in a hatchery. What makes them jump on one out here?
I think that a lot of it's just their natural hardwiring. They're keying in on prey items that hundreds of years of evolution have taught them are prey. So they're not looking at a worm and saying necessarily, at least initially, that's a worm and that looks delicious. They're keying in on a certain kind of movement, a certain scent, something they're picking up on that says that is prey, that is edible. You raise an interesting point that I've actually had discussions with fish biologists about. We often wonder amongst ourselves what makes a fish realize a worm is prey. And again, I think it's this hardwired predator instinct about the movement and the scent that it's giving off that says to the fish, this is food.
What else do you want to tell us about this beautiful place that we're visiting here today?
I think the best thing I could tell you is come out here and experience it for yourselves. We're here on kind of a late winter, early spring day. It's fairly quiet.
It's a little cold.
Yeah, little brisk out there today. We're hiding under the shelter to get out of the rain. But this is a lovely place to come out to bring the family, not just for anglers, because I know some families are mixed. Not all families are all anglers. As you can see, there's lovely places to picnic. There's grass to play on, disc golf courses, opportunities for paddle sports. If you're one of the many folks in Portland that took that up over the last year or so as an opportunity to get out of the house, there's something here for everyone, and there's great angling to boot. So I would tell people, come out here, experience it for yourself. It's an easy drive, and you will not be disappointed.
That's for sure. That's for sure. One of the things, too, to keep in mind is Free Fishing Weekend. I think it's the first weekend in June. It's touch and go as to whether or not, because of the COVID situation, that we'll have the Free Fishing Weekend extravaganza out here that's put on by I'm Hooked. So stay tuned, check on that and see if that's going to happen this year, because they put on a great meal for the kids. They hand out t-shirts, fishing rods, and we try to get everybody out in the boat too. Whether it be, and it's great for the parents to go out with the kids too. It's just a lot of fun. It's something that's not to be missed, and it's great for the people that are participating, those that provide their boats on a volunteer basis, as well as the kids and the parents that come out and get a kid a good start in fishing. Please join us this year. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me and for the opportunity to talk about what you, as you said, is really a jewel here in the Coast Range.
Thanks everyone for viewing this edition of Tackle Box Talks. Thanks to Peter from Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife for joining us today on today's show. Thanks to Mark, our co-host of the show, for asking the amazing questions and getting some awesome responses. Hopefully you guys learned a lot today. I'm Daniel Kittleson from Washington County Parks. Recreate safely and tune in for our next show.